was a 3-week-long journey. And really the main objective was to travel to what is called the Great Garbage Patch. For people who don't know about it, wouldn't have heard of it before, could you explain what it is?
So we sail through a very remote place, as you say also. Like the space station is closer than any island. So we sailed through the North Pacific, over the North Pacific, and from Oahu in Hawaii. So from Honolulu is where we set sail, and then we sailed across that big ocean and landed in Vancouver, Canada. The motivation, the reason to go through there was to get a little bit more understanding of the plastic pollution problem for the ocean and of course how it impacts the wildlife and us, but really like to collect samples of microplastics out there in the vast ocean. So we were 14 women on that boat. And that was also a part of the point, to have women from different perspectives, different countries, different industries, and different backgrounds to come together and look at this problem and take their, lessons and learnings and new knowledge with them on land again. That first sample that we looked at together on that boat, it was for me really just like somebody punched me in the stomach. It was really emotional to understand it in that way and kind of heartbreaking.
Hi Siri, and welcome to the Shades of Life podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and being here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time as well. And you're joining us from Puerto Rico, which is a nice destination. So, Siri, today with you, we are going to talk about the state of the plastic crisis through your experience of a truly transformative voyage, an all-woman expedition that sailed to the Great Garbage Patch in the North Pacific Ocean. To put things in context for people watching and listening, a reminder that millions of tons of plastic are lost in the environment every year, polluting the entire planet from the Arctic snow to the deepest oceans. And studies have shown that you are consuming microplastics and toxics unknowingly through food and water and the air we breathe. And although it's not fully understood what this means for human health yet, it is known that it is changing the way our body works, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that later as part of the podcast. So if you want to know more about the eye-opening findings of this expedition in one of the most remote parts of our planet, carry on listening and also subscribe to our channel below to allow us to continue to deliver these conversations to you. So Siri, first question for you. Can you tell us about this expedition? Because it is the heart of our conversation today. What was it about? What was the objective of it?
Yeah, so, well, as you say, it is really it was a life-changing expedition. So the sailing, just to explain also the area where we're sailing for people. So we sail through a very remote place, as you say also. Like the space station is closer than any island. So we sailed through the North Pacific, over the North Pacific, and from Oahu in Hawaii. So from Honolulu is where we set sail, and then we sailed across that big ocean and landed in Vancouver, Canada.
Yeah.
So to get
actually,
like sort of like,
sorry, I don't know why. I thought you started from Vancouver and ended in Hawaii, so that's good.
Yeah, so we started there, and we also saw the massive impact on the plastic pollution on the island of Hawaii. We did the cleanup on like the windward side where all the plastic comes in. So already before we even set sail, we got a little bit of an understanding of this huge problem.
Okay.
And yeah, so we sailed for almost 3 weeks, and it was like 3,000 nautical miles. So this area is huge. And why we chose to sail there is because you probably heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is called, unfortunately. And the motivation, the reason to go through there was to get a little bit more understanding of the plastic pollution problem for the ocean, and of course how it impacts the wildlife and us, but really like to collect samples of microplastics out there in the vast ocean. So we were doing constantly that during that sail. So in short, that was like of the core of it. And so we were 14 women on that boat, and women because women in STEM, you can say, is what the crew was made up of. So so it was a mixed, diverse crew, and that was also a part of the point, to have women from different perspectives, different countries, different industries, and different backgrounds to come together and look at this problem, and take their, lessons and learnings and new knowledge with them on land again.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about these women later, but if we focus on you first, how did you get involved in such an expedition? What brought you there? What were your own motivations?
Yeah. So basically, for me, growing up, I sailed with my parents and my sister on the coastlines of Norway and in Scandinavia. So from early childhood, I had like a mask on, and I loved exploring the coastlines. And throughout my life, I've enjoyed doing activities like that, snorkeling, and now I free dive and also surfing. And I've seen the plastic pollution. I've seen different environmental impacts on the coastlines and in the oceans. So for me, it's a cause that, like, it's close to my heart, you can say, to look at this problem and see what I can do with it. And and as a designer myself, I also know that, there is so many solutions to this problem, but I wanted to learn more about it. And I remember it was like a late autumn evening, like late evening, and it was dark outside in Norway and raining. And I saw this piece coming up during some of my research on this topic. I saw that they wanted crew for this sailing expedition. So I immediately sat down and typed out an application, and yeah, got a phone call later, and
Nice.
and yeah, so it was really funny how these things come to you sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just knew that I wanted to be on that boat.
Yeah. So something I haven't said is that there is a film that has been made about the expedition, and we will give the details to our audience in the show notes. And it is very eye-opening about the plastic crisis. So definitely can't recommend enough to people to watch it, because even if we've all heard of the plastic issue, we don't always measure very well what it does mean. So you told us that the expedition started from Hawaii, and you ended in Vancouver in Canada, and it was a 3-week long journey. And really the main objective was to travel to what is called the Great Garbage Patch. For people who don't know about it, wouldn't have heard of it before, could you explain what it is? I think it's called also, and in the eXXtrillion film about the expedition, it is referred to as the North Pacific Gyre. So is it like a vortex? Could you explain a little bit about it?
Yes, it's the North Pacific gyre that is correct. So it's these big ocean currents. So it's the wind and the currents that collects these plastic fragments from all across the world. So there are several gyres, but this is like the biggest collection of ocean plastic. So that's why we chose that. So it's really the ocean currents, the winds that collects this plastic there. So a lot of it is washed up on shore, a lot of it sinks, but it's also this jar where it just spins around there and it's there for many, many years and it just accumulates. So that's why this jar was specifically interesting.
Yeah, and I think we can safely say also that it is one of the most polluted parts of the world because, as you explained, it accumulates the plastic and the pollution and it doesn't go anywhere, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So it is good to mention that this expedition was organized by eXxpedition with two X, EXX.
Yep.
An expedition is a not-for-profit organization which hosts research expeditions at sea with all-women crews to investigate ocean pollution and discovered what our role is in tackling it. So the expedition leader who did the voyage with you and was sailing the boat is the co-founder of eXxpedition, Emily Penn, a renowned skipper and ocean advocate. She's very well known in the ocean community. I wanted to ask you, what has been your experience of traveling with her? She's obviously one of the main characters also in the film. So can you give us some feedback?
Yeah. First of all, I want to mention because Emily was the one that was interviewing to select the crew. And that was my first meeting with her. And I remember so well, like one of the main points is that like one important factor is like she said, you're smiling a lot, like you're positive. We need that on a expedition like this. So yeah, this is needed. So um and also it was great having her on board with so much experience in this field and it was also really great how she let us find our place, each member on the boat, each we got to like find our place and take the lead. So she was really really good at that and just facilitating that to happen basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been on calls with her in the past because I've looked actually with a company to support what she does because her expeditions are so important in terms of researching plastic pollution. And she's a big character and so passionate about the topic. She's incredible. And people who watch the eXXtrillion film, they will really get that knowledge from her that transpires through the film. So
Yeah.
as we said, Siri, eXXpedition, the organization, focuses on all women crews. Can you tell us a little bit more about how many women were on this expedition with you? And was it easy to cohabitate together because you were on a relatively small boat for several weeks or 3 weeks? So could you tell us about it overall?
Yes, it seems like a big boat when it's docked up, but when you're out there on the seas, it's suddenly like, oh, okay, this is yeah. It is not like luxury, even though it's a big boat. It really is. You have to quickly learn to trust each other as crew members, as humans, because you're there alone. So you need to have that support. Because if something happened, we, the crew, are the one who needed to solve it. So that was quite immediate. Immediate. I felt like from the start that this trust it just came. And also because we all had the same passion and we wanted the same thing. We were interested in knowing more about this problem. We wanted to meet people from different backgrounds. So even though we didn't know each other, we were very open to that. So that just means it was a good start. And I do have had people asking me like, oh yeah, women. So how did that go on a small boat? But it went great. I can tell you, it went great. So really, we supported each other, found our roles, and it was challenging. Different things was challenging. Some women left their family at home. Some had not been on a sailboat before, definitely not sailed for 3 weeks. So it was a lot of things at this, but that also meant that we got to know each other really quickly, and it was really a great experience because you get close to each other and connect really well, especially on those night shifts together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite magical how that can happen on a sailboat like that.
Yes, so referring back to the film about the expedition, so the film director Eleanor Church, who will be with us at the event we have very soon with Scarlet Red Mag, she starts the film by leaving behind her family because she has two small kids.
Yeah,
And I imagine, it was a bit the same for everybody. You leave behind your normal life.
yeah.
You're going to cohabitate with, was it 14 women? How many?
14 women.
Some
Yeah,
14 women.
yeah,
Uh, and yeah, the boat, every inch of the boat is used for something. There isn't so much space, and you have these bunk beds that we see very well also on the boat. So yeah, it is a different environment. But
yeah.
I think a lot of women that I certainly know who are a bit adventurous would definitely aspire to such an expedition. So could you tell us about the women on board and their different roles? Were you all scientists or did you have diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, so it was diverse background. So there were scientists and marine biologists, and it was designer like me and another designer focusing more on packaging, and a circular economy specialist, and filmmaker, and storytellers, teachers, and from different countries. So it was very much a diverse crew. So, but we all helped with the science. We had to learn a little bit about what to do that correct and follow protocol on that. And then, so that was the mix of definitely a mixed crew. Yeah.
Anybody could join, really. I think that's also an important message. If you're
Yeah.
motivated to do such an expedition, it's possible.
Yeah. And it's definitely, just to add, it is needed because maybe you think like, oh, I can't do anything about this big problem. You feel a little bit helpless, but that is definitely not the case. You just have to see the role you can take, and all hands on deck is needed for this. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I actually think that's one of the main objectives of expedition, to really raise awareness of the issue, but also to encourage people to see what they can do about it, wherever you are. And it doesn't matter
Exactly.
your background because everybody can do something about it in the end.
Yeah.
So most of the girls on board were not sailors, as obviously Emily was, but
Yeah.
perhaps not maybe were either. So, because I remember at the beginning, I think of the documentary, Emily says, "Oh, the next few days are gonna be really tough." So,
Yes.
you've never been
Yes.
on such an expedition, you don't know what's coming. And that type of small boat, you're definitely, if you go for a storm, you're definitely gonna feel it. So, how were the sailing conditions during the trip? Would you describe it as challenging or comfortable and it was like a cruise?
Yeah. The word Pacific maybe can be a little bit deceiving in that way. And yeah, I remember that briefing we had on land, like before we set sail, it was like you said, okay, this is going to be a little bit tough. We need to kind of toughen up, and it will get better as you go. So it was a little bit of a intense emotions going out of that harbor with basically wind coming straight in our faces and big waves. So it was some rough few days, and before everybody got their sea legs, yeah, a lot of us got seasick, and it was a little bit of rough. So we're kind of like tacking out and into that ocean. So, but it was, yeah, I would say that was challenging. Yeah, I mean, I've been on a sailboat before also. I've never been on a journey like that ever, sailing, um, maybe like having one night crossing or something like that. So never living on a boat without land. So, yeah, I would say that would be quite tough for a lot of us. And one of the crew members, she got quite like bad seasickness that wouldn't stop. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
get.
also I think like because we wanted to sail the science we did, we needed to have calmer seas. So that came later, a little bit calmer seas, but maybe not as calm as we had anticipated and expected. So, but we can still do the science, and it was definitely calmer weather. But I think in general, it was a little bit more wind than expected.
Yeah, because to be able to do the scientific research, I think it's explained in the film, you need certain conditions as well. So that's
Yeah.
important.
So
I
the
guess,
first days we were living, like this. So, and the toilets, they were like
oh, there.
in front, so it's where the most movement. So yeah, you just had to hang on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning, it's always parts when you do adventure travel. It's like when you go hike a mountain, you never know also if you're going to have altitude sickness. I guess with a boat, it's the same. Are you going to be seasick? You don't know before you actually do it.
Yeah,
That's part of the journey and the surprising.
that is part of it. Yeah, exactly. You have to adapt, and I think if we train that, it's better for us in like on land as well to adapt to challenges.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good message. So, would you say that you have an adventure spirit? And also, I wanted to ask you, what was it like? Because I'm trying to imagine myself doing it. What was it like to find yourself in the middle of the Pacific? Because when you see a map of where you were, there is no land around. You're in the middle of the ocean. That's it, basically. And you're
Mm.
really far from everything else and what makes our everyday lives. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, have you sailed yourself?
No, oh yes, actually, in your country
Yeah.
of origin, I've done a trip on a bigger boat than you were, not
Hmm.
massive, but a good sized boat, which means we
Hmm.
had proper cabins. But it was in the north of Norway, in the north of Tromsø, which was an
Nice, beautiful.
incredible trip. But I haven't sailed on a boat the size you have, so it wasn't like that
Hmm.
sailing, if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, because I have been sailing and had that, 360 degrees ocean around me before, but this was different. This was definitely different because now I understood how far I was from land because we were sailing, 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 24 hours, never stopping. And then it kind of gradually builds up and you're heading into what feels like nowhere. And was where we're going. And it's 5,000 meters deep or more below us. And then it's just like this. Yeah, it was funny when we were during night watch, just thinking of the space station above us. The humans up there were closer to us than anybody on land. So it's a little bit mind blowing in that way. But you also, which is also gives you this perspective of being on this boat together, where this is your community, basically this is your island. So you have to make use of the resources you have to share, think about it, be mindful of what you eat, what you do with the trash, the water, everything. So it's basically, yeah, it is pretty much, you get very, very aware of
Yeah, you're
your
like in a
consumption.
capsule.
And
Yeah, I've actually heard that
yeah,
expression before, that when you're at sea, like lost, in the middle of the ocean like this, you're like in a capsule, and it's like, yeah, that's like actually being on a vessel in space. It's kind of a similar feeling. And many
yep,
times I've heard people say that this is when they get a bigger attachment to our planet.
yes,
A different kind of understanding of it as well.
yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think, yeah, now I just forgot what that expression is, that the astronauts, when looking down at the Earth, it's like I'm sure some of your listeners now are saying
That
that
our
expression. I
planet
forgot
is
about it,
more
but
fragile than we think, or yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And you understand um, basically also how you're connected through the ocean, how it's not like something that separates you, but it's actually connecting you to each continent, to each country, to each other. So it's definitely a perspective shifting experience, I would say.
Yeah.
You don't get that from flying over that ocean.
No,
Yeah.
and it's the beauty of doing such trips, because it's a break in our everyday routine, and it makes you look at the world differently, and it's kind of open your horizons, isn't it?
Yeah. The
So
overview effect is that was what I was looking for.
yes, yes,
Yeah, I
yes,
think.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. So we did say it was an all-woman expedition, and there was a reference about this in the film that I wanted to bring up in our conversation. So would you say that with this expedition, there is an underlying message with these all-woman expeditions, that we women can do it? Because, it's quite unusual, an all-woman expedition at sea, in this circumstances. It's a Pacific, it's massive, it's huge. But I was thinking, if we can do an expedition like this, considering the objective of your expedition, for me, it's almost like there is also a message that we can also solve any crisis we put our talent to, including the plastic crisis. We shouldn't put limits, in front of us, like we often do.
Yes, exactly. Like mental limits, borders. Yeah, we need to wash those away because it's just mental. We can definitely fix this. And I mean, this is a global problem, and it affects all of us as humans, but also for women, it affects us a little bit differently because um, these plastic pieces that we look at and that get smaller and smaller into micro and nanoplastics, when they're in the ocean, they absorb the toxins around them in their environment. And these toxins can accumulate in the food chain. And especially for women during pregnancy, this is a problem because it can be passed on to the babies in the womb, and also while breastfeeding, it can be passed on, these toxins. So the implications for women, and it's also women in general, women's health is understudied. So it's really also, that is also part of this. So
Yeah.
there's really need to be more research on women's health in general, but this is also how it connects specifically to the plastic problem for women.
Mm. So, generic question, because you did mention there was a packaging designer who joined the expedition with you, and in the film, she says that she needs to her own motivation is that she needs to learn where our consumer packaged goods end up, where our plastics end up. Because we all know that we are still living in a take, make, throw away culture today for the largest part. Do you think people realize where our plastic packaging ends up and the extent of its consequences?
Yes, unfortunately, I don't think we know enough about that. For us, for us that are involved and looked at this issue for a while, some of us say that we get like plastic glasses on, so we see we see things, which can be good and bad. But I think, we think that we throw it and that it just ends in the right place that it's supposed to go, wherever that away is unfortunately, this is a big problem. So I think a lot of people don't think about it that much. They don't know about it, and that's also why the solutions for this needs to be at different levels. It needs to be, yeah, as a consumer, you have to take some choices, but also for the industries and policy. So it's different levels that we need to look at those solutions. But I think for us as consumers, it is, yeah, we can also be more aware. And unfortunately, this is also, it can be a little bit hard to get into, but once you learn and make some routines, it's not that bad, and it feels very good to avoid those single-use plastics as far as you can.
Yeah, yeah. No, I always tell all of my guests, never assume people know what you know. And it is through expeditions like this, and there are wonderful people who do wonderful things, but it is by bringing back these images that the X-Trillion film is doing that it makes us realize, oh, actually, this is where our plastic bottles end up. It's far from us in the great garbage patch in the middle of the Pacific, far from everybody else. The space station is here, as you said.
Yeah.
But it's there. And
I don't mind.
Comes back at us, as you
exactly
explain.
Yeah. And that part I think people don't know about. So I think this film is a brilliant example of how you can understand that a little bit more and get more connected to it, so you can take responsibility in whichever way you can. But yeah, it's a great adventures as well, like you need to join. So it's quite I would say it's quite unique to be able to join that that expedition, even though if you're just watching it from home.
So my next question, it actually brings me back to a school trip I did in my teens because, I don't know, I can't remember, let's say 14 years old, I can't remember. But I remember we went to visit a factory making plastic. And, when plastic was invented, it's a material that was seen as an amazing invention because obviously it is so solid. You can do so many things with it. It is this kind of forever material, sadly. And I don't think, and it's been an amazing invention, but we can say this from many things like, cars are powered by fuel. Now, there is air pollution. So here we are talking of plastic pollution. And we certainly didn't realize, probably at the time, the pollution that plastic would create. So I wanted to ask you, with everything we know today, what is your own view of plastic today?
Yes, it is definitely, like you say, it's quite an amazing material in that way. It's like forever lasting, and that's the unfortunate part of it. it's an amazing, you know, it has amazing um, advantages, but it is what we didn't think about was you know, the big impacts it has. And I think we can't fathom the economical like negative impacts this this has brought us. So yeah, it is. It's definitely just needed to be looked at with new eyes. It needs to. We need to look at new materials and really just stop the plastic production, which is just going straight up. It's just unfortunately um, the
All,
virgin plastic.
it seems like all the issues we have are, some of the biggest, like emissions, despite, all the conversations that have developed, despite all the people who are looking and implementing solutions, despite this, these problems continue to increase. We haven't decreased them. And it's kind of really sad, but really staggering. It's like, how can we still be there? And we haven't even started to decrease, you know.
Yeah, that is the thing. And there's so much market forces, economical forces behind these industries. So yeah, it needs to be really, you know, we really just need to through up policy. And now also with the global plastics treaty meeting coming up now, it is a big, you know, chance for us as a global get together and get some goals on paper that are quite, you know, concrete and something that can be worked towards instead of just seeing this plastic production just rise. So
Yeah.
so yeah, but uh what shall I say? I'm always positive as a designer. This is also my approach to things. You know, I'm a problem solver, look into things, and there are solutions because this is the human-made problem. So of course, but you know, it's gonna take us time to get there. But it needs to be new policies and also for me, what I feel about plastic, you know, I think it is too cheap. Also, you know, it's too cheap to make things,
Yeah.
and that it's so expensive, the way it ends up, and we don't know the impact it has on our economy, our environment, our health. I think I think that number is probably, you know, we don't even know, but I think we have to also think about it this way. It's way too cheap, unfortunately, in that way also. So
It's
because we need to have those use the new technology, new solutions, um, and yeah.
I mean, it's always good to have challenges, but I was actually thinking before doing this podcast with you, the people who are going to come up with plastic bottle replacements that bring circularity. Obviously, there is a cost, that you need to take into account. It's the same as, replacement of fossil fuels. The people who are going to come up with a solution, if it happens at some point, we are going to get really rich, I think. So
Yeah,
I feel it's worth looking into it, for the new entrepreneurs. That's a really interesting field of research.
definitely. And there's things happening. Yeah.
So talking of research, Siri, you had a lab on board. So can you explain for listeners what was the scientific research that has been done while you were on board?
Yeah. So what we did was trawling the ocean surface, so the top layer of the ocean, um, for microplastics. So we had something called a manta, like you can say like it's a big mouth, and with a net that collects a fine net that collects all the things that are on the ocean surface. So so we did that several times a day. And then took the samples, being careful of not contaminating it ourselves. And and then went through them with like we were sorting them on the boat. So we're sitting with, looking at them with microscope, and it is just mind blowing how small these pieces are. And there are smaller, we just don't see them. But and then we sorted it in different categories. So it's by size and by type. And yeah, so we all collected it like that. And all the samples went to further to research on land again.
Yeah, and to various research studies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and obviously the research is so important. Where you've been, we know it's an area that's polluted. I think what I was surprised by is how polluted it is.
Yeah.
And I did a podcast recently on another expedition, similar sailing boat size as yours, but they went through the Northwest Passage, so more Arctic of the Pacific. And it's been our most successful podcast to date, and people have really loved to discover, the objective of the expedition, because it is a very understudied area of the ocean, because obviously it was very difficult to access it. With a great garbage patch, the picture is completely different because we know it's polluted. But that's interesting through your expedition, through the film, to discover how polluted it is, I think.
Yeah. And I should also mention we did also some other science, but also with we had a tag we could put like on one of the bigger, because it's a lot of bigger pieces as well. We were every day collecting the microplastic smaller pieces. But I was at the helm one day and I saw something like green on the horizon. So we sailed towards that, and it was a huge net of fishing gear, and like everything was just tangled up in this huge, huge ball floating on the surface. So one of the crew members, or two of them, jumped in and managed to connect this tag on this huge floating ball. So that could track its movements. And this ball was later, I don't know how many months later it was collected. It was many months later it was collected again and brought up on a boat. Like it was too huge for us to take with us. So that was also part of part of the science. And
Yeah, really interesting.
yeah, so it is really interesting because it's so many different, especially when you're there and like understand it and actually look at it and like just sorting for hours and hours these small pieces. It's really just quite mind blowing, really. And you see that it's so much different things. So, where we don't know too much about where is this plastic coming from, what kind of materials is it? We can look at that.
Yeah, I think at some point one of the crew members.
How much is it?
Yeah. I think if I remember well, one of the crew members saw a whole plastic chair, like literally a whole chair floating on the ocean.
It's quite surreal. Yeah, you're so far away from humans, and then you see a
exactly.
toothbrush. Yeah. So it's very interesting to then, like, when you have more and more of these expeditions collecting data from remote places as well, so we can look at it as a whole as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to say, and because I have my co-creators who have watched the film before our upcoming event, and one of them had the exact same reaction I had when watching the film. So talking of plastics, what surprised me the most in the film of your expedition is that we actually didn't see like mountains of plastic. I don't know why, when I thought of a great garbage patch, I thought, oh, we're going to see mountains of plastic. It's like a big vortex, of plastic coming together. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't impressive in that way. But what I thought was staggering was that literally through your research that you did, literally, you can see that every inch of this piece of ocean where you were, which is massive, is polluted with microplastics that are not visible to the eye, but are very much there everywhere. And at some point during the film, I thought it was so poignant to realize how much we have polluted the ocean already and how much is in the environment already. So I wanted to ask you, was it something that surprised you too during the trip? Because really that was really one of my main takeaways personally.
Yeah. Yeah, it actually was, even though I felt like I was very, I've seen so much of plastic pollutions before, and especially on Hawaii as well, where we sailed out from. It was so massive, all the microplastics on the beach. We were cleaning the beach, and it was just like it was like it was covered, and that beach was cleaned regularly as well. So I I felt like I knew a bit about it, but actually that experience being on the ocean like that was, yeah, I was surprised as well. You can think of it like you go from this island, beautiful island, and you sail for a week. And while we were sailing, we were also noting down, doing research of what we could visually see on the surface, like the bigger pieces. So we also did that all the way, writing down what we saw. And then I remember one morning, one day, I like felt like, oh, this is more stuff now. But it's not like a garbage pile. It's more like now you see, oh, there and there and there. When you start to really look, you start to see it a little bit more. And so you sailed for one week, and then you're starting to see a little bit more trash again. And then you put this net down to take the samples from the surface. And that first sample that we looked at together on that boat, it was for me really just like somebody punched me in the stomach. It was really emotional to understand it in that way, and kind of heartbreaking. And yeah, that first like look at those microplastic, that sample, I was surprised. I was definitely surprised. And the myth of this like huge garbage patch that you have to like make your way through. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not like that. If it were, it would be, easier to clean up those bits. But these microplastics and nanoplastics, that's what makes it, yeah, that what makes it so hard.
Yeah, I really think it's so important to raise awareness of that because you know how, the media or social media likes to be sensational. Like it's actually probably more impressive to see so much plastic on a beach because it's tangible. People see it with their eyes. And even if people have heard of microplastic, because I think it has been quite popularized by now, when you look at the ocean like this and you don't forcefully see so much plastic, in reality, the problem is very there. Can't see it with the eyes, but this is when pollution gets really tricky. So let's.
Yeah, and it's hard to connect to it. When we live on land, we don't see that much. We don't have that connection, call it that. So for me, this expedition really, really built that connection. So when I was on land again, every like plastic I touched, I could see that in the ocean. So,
So, one important question for you. What do you think people should know about microplastics today that perhaps they don't? Should we be concerned about it? So again, assuming people don't forcefully know, about it or the effects of it.
yes, I think we need to know more as well about it, and I think you know like I'm more of like I want to bring a positivity into this conversation as
Yeah,
well, because it is hard, you know, but we can take control over like our immediate surroundings a little bit, and we can be a part of like spreading the knowledge about it. And yeah, the plastic breaks up into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, and it collects toxins and it comes into our food chain. And we need to be a little bit, you know, aware of that. I mean, we are impacted, all of us. So there's really, in that way, we can't really change that part, but we can make it better by some of the things we surround ourselves with and what we eat.
Yeah, empowering ourselves, whatever we do,
Yeah,
whether it's individually,
yeah.
collectively. So I also
Mm.
wanted to mention another highlight of the film for me. And it was when Emily Penn, so the expedition leader, at some point she says she tested her own blood for 35 chemicals that are banned by the United Nations because they are toxic to humans and the environment. And out of those 35 chemicals, they found 29 of them in her own body, which is, eye-opening. And when you look at the details of these chemicals, it's chemicals that can lead to cancer, for example, to cancer, or chemicals that are endocrine disruptors, preventing our hormones to function correctly. And you mentioned this earlier, it could be crucial during pregnancy for women, because we can also pass these toxic chemicals to our own children. And people can read studies about this, the findings are there already. So what was your reaction to these findings that she shared with the group? Because actually in the film, she speaks directly to you, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think she said that she felt herself that she was like living healthy, eating healthy. So she was really, really surprised by these findings. And yeah, made some changes in her lifestyle and also this whole mission, you know. Um, so what was what was the question?
And I just wanted your reaction to her findings of 29 chemicals in her own body.
Yeah.
I was thinking before the podcast, personally, I eat mostly plant-based, but I do like fish and I cook fish regularly. I usually always pay attention that it is wild caught fish. But, with the microplastic and the toxicity of the oceans, even if it's not far, there is pollution anyway. And it's like, yeah, we do need to pay attention to these things and perhaps detox our
It's
bodies more. I don't
yeah.
know what's the
I
solution.
mean, it's hard. It's hard for us to know everything, but yeah, it's definitely we need to think about what we put in our bodies. And in general, our we made vegetarian and vegan meals together. And what we did do, like collectively, we made a decision: should we try to fish to get some fish for some of our meals? So okay, we made a decision as a crew. Let's do it. And we caught a couple of tunas that were delicious. So, but tunas are, also higher up in the food chain, so it also can accumulate stuff and toxins in those fish. So that's also something to be aware of. But we did have those meals, and we also dissected the fish to see if we can find anything. We didn't find any microplastic that we could see.
Yeah.
But I think it was something like the liver maybe didn't look so well or something like this. But
Okay.
yeah, but so we did have that, and I try to be aware myself, my eating habits, and try to eat food that are not wrapped in plastics and that. But yeah, for food in general, it is I feel like starting to get a little bit hard. But trying to eat as clean as you can and being aware of where your food comes from. I think that is also part of like this disconnection from nature that we unfortunately have on different levels, but also from our food sources, because we don't really know where they come from. We don't maybe know anything about how they were produced, and that connection is also something that we should
and this is
be more aware of.
Yeah, and I mean, that's also always a message I'm trying to give. This is when you see everything is connected. So you can't just talk about, oh, it's bad to eat salmon from farms when, the ocean is polluted. And if you buy salmon, even if it's wild caught, you have this ocean pollution going on. And, it's like a big chain of causes and consequences overall. And yeah, it's just not enough to look at things in isolation. So one thing I wanted to ask you, if we can perhaps go a little bit deeper into this, could you tell us about the impact of plastic on sea wildlife and the marine environment? Because I think one thing that perhaps we don't look at with this angle perhaps enough is that many animals will see what they find in the ocean as potential food, regardless of what it is. They find something, oh, perhaps it's food. And they don't have the awareness we have about plastic. So they will feed on plastic without probably realizing it could be a death condemnation for them. So have you been discussing this with the crew during your expedition, the effect on marine wildlife?
Yes, we definitely talked about that a lot. In some ways, we were kind of happy that we didn't see that much wildlife out there because it was just a soup of plastic as well. But we saw an
some
albatross.
dolphins at some point, like a big
Dolphins, yeah.
So lovely.
Yeah, we were also happy when we finally could see some life instead of just plastic for days and days and days. And also an albatross, flying. It's also a little bit devastating seeing that because we know they go out to get food for their children. Yeah, and they will bring back plastic and feed them plastic, unfortunately. And there is so much plastic in the animals because they mistake it for food. One of the scientists aboard, she was researching juvenile turtles and really, the dead ones, opening them up and looking inside of them basically to see what they were eating. So she also developed a new method doing that and figuring out what they were eating. So she was also really interested because these tiny turtles, when they go out to sea, they're the currents bring them maybe to this gyre to grow and get bigger. And what will they eat? Maybe it's a tiny thing that looks like something edible, and then they just eat the plastic, and that is everywhere. I don't know if it's many turtles that doesn't have plastics inside of them anymore, and it's a little bit like that. There is things, and this is also what this whole mission is about, like making the unseen seen, talking about it, because there's so much unseen. We don't see the toxins in our bodies and in the environment. We don't see the microplastics. So this is just also about that part. And, we see a little bit, but not too much either. About entanglement is a big problem. These ghost scares, or like trash with maybe fishing nets, and the animals gets entangled with this. So this is another huge problem. And so there are a lot of conversations about that naturally.
Yeah, I have to say a little anecdote from me, because that's an image that will always stay with me. Some years ago, I was in Greece, on a Greek island, and by the sea, there was a plastic bag, because people don't forcefully pay attention. Sometimes the plastic bag drop on the water, and even if there are boats and people on the boats, they don't forcefully retrieve it. And I promise you, there was this plastic bag, and fish arrived, and they literally ate the fish in less than 2 minutes. And it was the plastic bag in less than 2 minutes. And it was a whole plastic bag that was complete as it was. And that really shocked me. And I was like, wow. And that must be happening everywhere in so many places of the world. And yeah, that's just what's happening today.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, that was a really shocking image.
Yeah, that doesn't sound pleasant. But yeah, I think this is also needed. We don't see the things that are happening in the ocean. We don't really see it. If it were happening on land, we would be shocked by by it, because we could see it maybe more easily. So this is
Yeah. So, if you compare your mindset before and after the expedition, what impact would you say this expedition had on you overall?
Wow. Many things. I think for the plastic problem, my motivation also for joining was to learn more and to be able to do more on land. So for me, as a designer, I also went into more strategic work, basically like sitting on the bigger table, where more important decisions are made, if we can call it that. So basically, kind of like it was a step on in that journey for me, and also just the connection, the ocean family. I call it my ocean family because there are so many people out there that work with same issue, but in different ways and different outputs. And it's really also for me just building that network, very supportive, and we all like support different projects, and we can work together in that way. And for the awareness of plastic around me, it was also a huge shift. I thought I was aware, when I left land, but coming back to land, it was a big, big, big shift. Like I saw plastic everywhere because it is everywhere, but especially like the first months was a little bit intense, I would say, actually. So you have to find a balance, like what can you focus on? For me, it didn't really help me that didn't buy toilet paper because it was wrapped in plastic. So I couldn't get myself to grab that toilet paper. I was like, where's the toilet paper that are not wrapped in plastic? And it's hard to find, especially, a start, but then you can figure out what kind of work for you and where you should put your energy into and what gives the most best effect, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would say that was kind of the big shift for me.
Yeah. I had a really interesting discussion with someone working, with companies aiming to improve their impact, whether it's, waste, pollution, sustainability, circularity, all of this. And during our conversation and when preparing the conversation, we looked at the figures and the data. Because a lot of people are saying, if you ask people, would you want to buy more sustainable? The answer would be yes, most of the time. But then it doesn't translate in the facts at the same level. And actually, sustainable consumption is still very small, which is quite disappointing in a way, but there are lots of reasons for that. And, it's about creating that shift, like the toilet paper that you reference wrapped in plastic. It's about creating that shift, can we support companies, brands that really make an effort to bring sustainable solutions, because there are many today, but the intake we see from consumers is still very, very low. So, obviously we can only hope, and it will certainly be democratized more and more. And, it's also a question of price and availability where you are, and etc. But it's definitely something to continue to look at and not lose hope. But I really loved in the film, I have to say, because you are a designer, Siri, and in the film you say that you had a lot of thoughts about how you can use your skills in a better way than you did then. So we can start to see your transformation during the film in that respect, which was really nice.
Yeah, and it continues to be a journey for me in that direction. So that's really fun to be a part of that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I also want to mention that something that, we've discussed with my past guests quite often, and probably that you have experienced yourself by going on such an expedition. You see the overwhelming aspect of the plastic crisis, which could also be another crisis today. But it's about taking some steps, and there are no small steps to address it, because if, even 4 billion people on the planet take a small step, that's 4 billion small steps, isn't it?
Exactly, that's what it is. And it's also needed, the to work with the industries to find the right pinpoint the right solutions and the policy at global levels and working, always try to fill in these knowledge gaps and yeah,
Yeah.
make use of new technology, and also like the responsibility towards the producers. So the responsibility doesn't always end at the consumer level, because that's yeah, that is also really hard. It needs to be solved in those higher levels as well.
Mm. So something very interesting in the film as well is that towards the end, you are having like a brainstorming session with the crew about how we can avoid plastic to enter our ocean in the first place. I wanted to ask you, did you all come up with anything conclusive, or has something stayed with you more from these conversations?
Yeah, I think this workshop is really great to look at, like, map out the different solutions so we can understand where do we fit in all of this. We have the policy level, and then you have like production industry level, and then you have the community, maybe you can say, and then individual levels and overview, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming and hard to approach. You see that, okay, I fit in over here I can do a lot, and also over here this is what I'm going to focus my energy on. So it's a really great way to try to, and then also like concrete solutions in there. But there's yeah, there you can at least, like, it's a way to find your role in there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely concrete solutions in there, and there are people working on these also, and also from the boat, people changing their career and like understanding, okay, yeah, I need to do something else, or I need to do it a little bit differently, depending on what it is.
So to finish, and perhaps to also give some inspiration to people, because there is always the theory, but then there is also the practice. What solutions have you personally integrated in your own everyday life, apart from perhaps what you've cited already, if any? Have you managed
Mm.
to, find some solutions?
Yeah, I mean, it's also always the obvious one. Try to avoid the single-use plastics. Try to avoid buying that. And of course, recycle when you can. And it's also, better for your health if you use other containers than glass to store your food in or heat up your food in and all of that. So that's kind of the obvious thing. And also for me personally, I love to talk about this issue and my experience because this really is also how these things changes. You make these ripples in your community, talk with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and then things can start to shift slowly. So maybe you do something in your office, maybe you change something there, and then suddenly you over a couple of years, maybe you've done a lot. You don't even think about it, but it can start there. And yeah,
Exactly.
I think it's really needed to be positive in this situation because it feels so overwhelming and it's huge problem, but it's also important to just like,
Mm.
put your feet down on the ground and like, okay, this is the situation. What am I passionate about? Like, how can I find my role in this situation? What can I do? And yeah, and that can be different. It can be also like everything from like storytelling to um, working on new innovative solutions and or trying to make things more circular, new materials, or if you're in policy, yeah, there's a lot of roads to go there.
Yeah, and I would say I would encourage people to research what the solutions could be. If I look both at my personal and professional life, on a personal basis, for example, I love shopping at farmers markets. First, it can be cheaper actually to do it this way. So you benefit from it, and usually, the veggies and etc. They are usually not in plastics or a lot less. Sometimes there are products that have to still be, or the
Mhm.
solutions haven't been deployed yet. But there are, and also something I've started to do, like I've actually found, a shop where I live where they do refills for shampoo, for cleaning dishes, for what you use to do your washing machines. And so you always use the same plastic container, but you refill it,
Yeah.
basically. Things like this
Yeah, I
that
love
are so
I
simple.
love those. Yeah, those two examples are great. I think in addition to it can be less expensive, but it also can feel a little bit luxurious, which is also great.
Yeah.
And I mean, another topic for me is the textile industry, because these textiles, s- a lot of it is made of plastic, and we don't think about that part either. And it sheds tiny, tiny nanoplastics, which gets washed out, in your drain, from your washing machine, and from you're just wearing every day. So for me, that's also, I mean, I love other materials personally, because of their qualities, and also secondhand is great. You can find like really good quality, cheaper and more unique pieces. If you love to buy secondhand or switch, with your friends, instead of buying and look through your closet basically and see what you have instead of buying something new. I think that is also a big one that you can do that doesn't feel like you need to, maybe you can save money and then use it on an experience instead. And I think that is also a big one for me that
Mm.
I like to say to people, maybe you can try to, instead of like being a consumer, maybe you can start be a creator instead of like getting entertained by buying stuff. Maybe you can actually create something.
Yeah, that's lovely. So actually, fashion was going to be my professional example because I learned a lot about it by being the co-founder of a sustainable fashion company, and we did so much
Oh,
research.
hmm
And what you were saying about materials, absolutely, it's really key. I would say to people, try to avoid polyester and choose natural materials that are biodegradable. They are not going to be forever materials like plastics that are going to stay, in the soil, in the ocean, etc. forever. And we don't know how long plastic can last because we can't test it. It could be more than 1,000 years, when I say forever, in comparison to, I don't know, cotton, which would be a few months, and it's completely biodegradable. So obviously you need to take into account tinctures and coloring and, other chemicals that could be involved. But the other example is the packaging that we use for any goods that we create. And at this fashion company, we looked at alternatives, and there are great companies in all business areas that are offering solutions. For us, we looked at packaging made of seaweed instead of plastic. Looks very similar, can be very transparent. And, every time you sell a garment, instead of receiving it in plastic, you receive it in this seaweed packaging. And I promise you, it biodegrades. If you put it in water, it biodegrades in an hour, basically. So when you compare with 1,000 years of plastic or more, it makes a world of difference. And it is all of these solutions that people need to research and need to implement, whether it's in our private lives or business lives. That's important because it adds up.
It is definitely great business opportunities to grab and go for here. Also, being like in front of the pack, basically.
Earlier you were talking about how can we create positive stories. It is such great positive stories because the storytelling you can create around this is incredible. So there is no reason not to do it.
Yeah.
So Siri, we are coming to the end of this podcast. I love the conversation with you. So this podcast is called Shades of Life, as every guest bring their own color, vision, and mission to it. And I always end it with the same question. If you were a color, what would it be and why?
Oh, I love that question. Look down where now. I would say I think about like two colors right now, but I think I'm going to go for the azure color. It's like the blue clear color. It is like calm, energizing, and for me, I'm a free diver as well. We didn't talk about this now, but when you dive down in these clear waters, you can almost see this azure color. It's peaceful, it's beautiful, it's fresh. It gives energy in a good way. And I think this is also what I want to bring into this conversation and ending this, that, keep calm, work on the things you can do, and let's keep that freshness and energy going.
Lovely.
Keep the ocean clear and blue.
I absolutely love that, Siri. Great choice. I can't thank you enough for joining me on this podcast today. I'm having an event at the end of November 2024 for people who are watching this now in London, where we will screen eXXtrillion, the film about your expedition. We will have the film director with us, Eleanor Church, and it was her debut documentary on such a topic. And we will have other ocean plastic experts in different areas to look not only at the problem, but also the explanations and the solutions. So we will also have someone joining us from Ocean Bottle, because They are proposing a concrete solution for plastic before it enters our oceans, which is really, really important. So I also want to mention that there is a website for eXXtrillion. I will add it to the show notes. But all the screenings, whether it's in the UK or across the world, are listed there. So if you're interested in watching the documentary, you can refer to it. You can also visit the eXXpedition with 2X website and register your interest to join an all-woman crew like Siri did for future expeditions, because they do organize expeditions. It's not frequent, but it's on a regular basis, and there is a regular program with future expeditions being planned. There are also other ways you can support them, and you can find the details on their website. So I wanted to finish this conversation with a quote from Emily Penn, which I thought was great and refers to the title of the film called eXXtrillion. So she said eXXtrillion micro actions created this problem of the plastic crisis. And it is micro actions that will solve it. So change starts now. And we need an army of people across disciplines, as you've shared with us. And it was really the objective of these all-women crews and expeditions, to really have a representation across the board, because you don't need to be a scientist to take action. You don't need to be a designer to take action. You don't need to be a podcaster to take action. Everybody can, obviously. And it's great to spread the word, to have these conversations together, and to keep in mind what we can all do. So thank you so much for having you today, Siri.
Thank you so much for hosting me. It was a pleasure to dive in with you. And I encourage everybody to go and watch that movie, eXXtrillion, and you're not going to regret it. It's a journey.
It's excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and listening.